Well, I have heard, and again I didn't experience this directly, that Lee was a commanding figure. And by that, I take it to mean that he was someone who knew his own mind and knew where he wanted the museum to go, and pointed it in that direction and did everything within his power to achieve those objectives, whether it was with respect to the development of the collection or in terms of the development of an exhibitions program or the museum's educational activities. But he clearly was a very forceful and very purposeful leader of this institution who led by example. And that is to say, he was somebody who I understand took the leadership of the museum and its administration very, very seriously and spent a lot of time in both of those areas. But he also led by example in the curatorial realm as well. And I think this is really something that was quite admirable. Whether it can be duplicated in this day and age, however, is an entirely different matter. I think there was time and there was the expectation when during the period he was director, that a director could lead the curatorial staff, again, by example, by being a curator himself. And as you well know, his reputation is based on, in large measure, on his accomplishments both as a scholar and a curator, and particularly with respect to his extraordinary eye. Now, in this day and age, the director's job is much more complex. There are many more different parts to it, especially the part that requires you to be outside of the museum, representing it to many, many different constituencies. And that takes a lot of time. So too does the requirement to raise funds for the museum for capital projects such as the one we're engaged in now, or for the annual fund, just to raise money to fund the annual operations of the museum. Now that's very different today than it was during Lee's time. It's not something that I've been shy about doing, but it does take a lot of time indeed. Well, I think the most challenging and the most appealing at the same time is what's to be done with the collection. We are building, and again this is due in large measure to the efforts of Sherman Lee and of course his predecessors, but we are building on an extraordinarily strong and wonderful foundation. It is a great collection. It's a collection that is built on the foundations of connoisseurship, of quality and historical significance. And we have the resources to continue to develop that collection, or the collection in that way. And that's something I look forward to doing. There are lots of things we need to acquire. There are lots of parts of the collection that need to be shaped and refined and deepened. And to do so according to those very, very high standards that were established and sustained by Lee over the course of more than a quarter of a century is a wonderfully challenging task, but also one that I look forward to and really is quite an inspiration. I think the second thing that's so important about Lee's heritage, again, is his commitment to education. Now, at various points in time, going right back to its founding in 1916, this museum has defined its educational activities in relation to the needs of the community and the state of education in the field. And those have been defined variously because the museum has changed, the community has changed, and so has the field. And so we will continue to be committed to public education, primarily through the instrument of the collection itself, how it's interpreted, how it's used to engage audiences. But I think we'll do it differently than perhaps Lee did, or any of his predecessors, because it's a different time here in Cleveland. I am firmly in the camp of those who believe that the edition that Marcel Breuer designed for this institution in the late 1960s and was completed and opened to the public in 1971 is one of his great designs, a very fine design from the last part of his career. And I think it demonstrates the full range of talents that Breuer brought to the design of buildings. it is, as Lee put it, and I wholeheartedly agree with this assessment, one of the best pieces of modern art that he acquired for this institution. And it's one of the best pieces of modern design in the city of Cleveland. I'm enormously impressed with the building every time I walk through it. It is one of those tough, difficult designs that you often find from the late 1960s and early 70s that we sometimes call brutalism, but more politely, let's say mid-century modernism. But it's an outstanding example of the architecture of its period by a designer who was, I think, at the peak of his game when he designed it. It served us well for the last, excuse me, it has served us well for the last nearly 40 years, and I think it will continue to serve us well for the next 40. So we need to be good stewards of this building. It's part of the heritage of this institution, and of course it's part of the legacy of Sherman Lee as well.